I think we're ready to go. Welcome everyone to our next webinar for our professional development series. I'd like to introduce our two co-presenters. Maggie Elliott is the Director of Science and Technical Programs for the Washington Hop Commission. And Dr. Nellie Hill is an Assistant Professor of Agricultural Communications and Journalism at Kansas State University. And they are going to tell us about their research about navigating transparent pork production, analyzing visual attention of the Mashoffs website. So let's let them take it away.
All right, thank you so much for the introduction, and we appreciate everyone being here today. I won't belabor the introduction other than to say we're excited to share this research more broadly. This article was published in the Journal of Applied Communications. It was a labor of love for Maggie and I, and we're thrilled to tell you a little bit more about it and what it might mean for transparency in agriculture, science communication, and just talking about some key takeaways that we learned through the process of conducting eye tracking research, as well as research that looked at an innovative way of bringing greater transparency to production agriculture. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Today's objectives really are to describe the research that we conducted, and then pull out some key takeaways, and then finish up just with the discussion of how those takeaways might apply in your particular context. So with that, Maggie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Nellie. We are very excited to share this research with you today. And I mean, to be perfectly frank, the premise of the study is something that is not novel to the discipline of agricultural communications. Many of you are in this field because you realize that many industries in agriculture are facing a reckoning at this point. Many consumers are increasingly concerned with the origin of their food. You know, the vast majority of our consumers today are 2 to 3 generations removed from the farm, and this lack of direct experience contributes to an uncertainty and an unknown factor of where our food comes from. And we have seen that many industries of agriculture have undergone increased scrutiny for their production methods. And I think that this can be seen most fervently in animal agriculture. Today, pork production is under duress, or facing concerns about practices such as small areas of farrowing crates, gestation stalls, tail cutting. People are worried about the abuse of antibiotic treatments. There's a full spectrum of worries that consumers harbor about animal agriculture. And what this study allowed us to do was to be able to take a look at an innovative approach that a business was undertaking to be able to build transparency with their consumer audiences, and then also use a novel research tool in the discipline of agricultural communications, eye tracking, to be able to determine the salience of different aspects of production for consumers. So as agriculture is facing this reckoning, one area that has come under increased interest as an approach to be able to bridge those gaps between producers and consumers is this idea of transparency, of being able to lay everything out, to be able to grant your consumer base with enough information to be able to make their own decisions about the sanctity of your production processes. And one aspect of, and so transparency is a really important and integral part of any modern communications framework for agricultural businesses. But the nuances of exactly how to convey transparency can be a little difficult to manage sometimes. And what the Mashoffs did was an innovative approach. They decided, in an effort to be transparent, they wanted to grant their consumers with a full access, full map of the production process of their corporate farms. The Mashoffs is a family-owned pork production operation. They are now the 4th largest pork producer in the United States. And so they are facing many of these concerns, but the way that they took to educating their consumers about this space was novel. So the map that they integrated into their website shows a holistic framework, a holistic look of the entire process of pork production. Everything from even the breeding and genetics behind pork production, all the way to how the meat gets onto your plate at home. So the full system, full spectrum, to be able to grant their consumer audiences with the information that they needed. Each of these points, as you can see on this website, was accompanied by an educational module, really diving into a deeper scope about every piece of this system. Thank you, Nellie. So the conceptual framework that we utilized for this study was selective attention. And this is a theory that is inherent to eye tracking methodologies. The idea of selective attention really comes from the fact that every day, every person is inundated with a lot of complex information. We're constantly processing an immense amount of stimuli. And we have to be able to choose what is important to be able to just navigate our ways through our daily lives. So the idea behind selective attention is essentially that allocation equals attention. So where we choose to place our eyes, where we choose to emphasize, to learn more, to rest our eyes for even a millisecond longer, that means that that's something that our minds are processing, and that attention then can be translated into salience. So all of a sudden, eye tracking is this really incredible tool to be able to determine salience of individuals in a very experimental and non-invasive process. And that is something that we were very interested into merging these two together. Another layer of selective attention is really the idea of the top-down model of how people process information, how they seek information, how they process information, and that if it's something that aligns with their goals, with their identity, something that they're looking towards, then they're going to find themselves spending more time in that area. So it's a way to measure salience on a number of different levels. And as this map provided us with a full spectrum of the pork production process, we thought it was a really interesting, novel way to look at this issue, to be able to translate ideas of salience with the full scope of transparency and embed it in specifically to the pork production process, so we could take away goals and ideas going forward for website usability implications for ag communicators, and also just gain an understanding of what consumers care about and what they're really looking for in transparency to ultimately be able to build trustworthiness with our consumers. All right, so the purpose of this study was to explore visual attention regarding different aspects of the Mashoffs website. So our first research question was to determine what scan path patterns emerged from individuals' initial evaluation of the website. So there are several different elements you can measure with eye tracking. One of them is a scan path. That's looking at where people's eyes move, just tracking the path, essentially, the pathway. And then our second research question was, what areas of interest do participants attend to in the website? So this is the second layer of eye tracking methodology, which is you can look at scan paths and you can look at something called fixation, which is how long and how often the eye rests on a particular point. This is something that can help determine saliency. So this is the second part of the eye tracking methodology that we sought to determine. The third research question was that, are there differences in visual attention to the website between individuals with high agricultural involvement and low agricultural involvement? Now, this introduced another layer. We were able to use an instrument to be able to differentiate individuals with high agricultural involvement and low agricultural involvement. I think many times as agricultural communicators, we tend to separate ourselves anyway. And this was an interesting study to kind of put that to line of thinking, the test, and be able to determine if the scan path, if differences in visual attention were attributed to each different group. Our fourth research question was, how do participants perceive the trustworthiness of the Mashoffs organization? This research question really sought to dive deeper into the fact of what's the effect. So the Mashoffs have invested a lot of time and expertise and money into developing this specific website function. So what are the type of utilities that they are gaining from this venture? Our fifth research question was what improvements do participants perceive can be made to the website? And that was an open-ended question to be able to allow the room and the space for implications for website usability going forward. As this is all new to agricultural communications, this idea of a map, of a navigation tool, of integrating eye tracking into the system in itself, we just wanted to be able to give our participants room to explore different ways to approach this process.
So how did we do it? So we have recruited 74 participants who were students at Texas Tech University. We conducted this research while Maggie and I were students there. So we recruited 74 participants, and we recruited them to be compensated $20 cash for their time. Here you can see the breakdown of their academic classifications. What happened was, once they signed up for a time to come to our eye tracking lab, they first completed a pre-questionnaire in Qualtrics. So they would come in, sit down at the computer, and we would capture their demographic information, a couple questions from them beforehand. We also have them sign a consent form, all of the proper protocols for conducting research. Now, we used eye tracking hardware and software from Tobii Pro to conduct this research. Now, of course, not everyone has access to eye tracking hardware and software, but it is becoming more prevalent at universities across the country and does provide a really great explicit measurement of where people's eyes move across a screen, whether that be a screen on their phone or, in our case, a screen on a computer. Instead of asking people to report, where did you look, we can actually track exactly where their eyes moved. So to do that, we first had to calibrate our Tobii Pro. The student can just sit in a chair, pretty much this distance from a computer, and we calibrate their eyes. In the black box, you can see it's picking up the pupils of the participant. Then the participant follows along the screen, this orange dot, to make sure that the Tobii Pro is tracking the eye movements correctly. That's how we get the scan path patterns and the areas of interest, is through this accurate calibration of our hardware and software. They then went through a stimulus presentation where we just told our participants to explore the Mashoffs pork production website at their leisure. They were able to just look through it for really as long as they'd like. We limited them to 15 minutes just to look around, just to explore. Being as this is such a novel website and a novel method, we simply just encourage them to explore their interest level as if they had just stumbled across this website in their everyday searching for information. Or if they were a student, trying to build like an essay for an assignment, that they were just out information seeking and came across this website, explore it as you would in that similar context. Once they were done looking through the website, we tracked all of their interactions with the website, all of their scan paths. They then completed a post questionnaire in Qualtrics. Those included the questions about like trustworthiness, how could we improve this website, those kinds of things. And then we gave them the $20 cash, and that was the end of their session. So to give you a look at what our participants saw, this is a brief video showing you what the Mashoffs website looks like. You can go to this website if you just Google the Mashoffs pork production. This is the website that comes up. You can click on these different areas in the pork production process, and it expands it with more information about that particular step. It has photos, videos, explanations, and more educational content that you can dive into further. It connects you to other areas of the map where you can learn more, so you can really get into the flow of the production process and the steps within it. You're able to read more about what you're interested in, or just look through the photos and videos. It really is a choose your own adventure website, and we really saw that in our data as well. So what did we find? So Maggie ran through all of our research questions. For research question 1 was just asking, what were some of the scan paths that were dominant in our participants? There were no significant patterns of spatiotemporal visual allocation, meaning there were no common scan paths or ways that our participants moved through the website. They all had an individual method for doing so. RQ2 asked for interest areas. Where were they really looking at areas of interest in the website? So implicitly, there were no discernible AOIs. meaning that there were no measured places where everyone had a significantly different amount of attention that they gave to a particular area, like the guild developer or the breed to wean farm, for example. Now, explicitly in our post stimuli questionnaire, we asked where they spent the most time, and they reported they spent the most time looking at the breed to wean module, the guild developer, and the packing module. Our Q3 asked if there were differences among high and low involvement in agriculture. Our data showed that there was not. Our Q4 asked about trustworthiness. Overall mean trust score was a 4, with 1 being a low number, 5 being high trust. And then our 5th question asked for recommendations from our participants that they might have for how this website could better serve them. They mentioned the encompassing navigation tools, wanted more content additions, and just a more developed website structure. Overall, we found that our participants, because there were no significant scam patterns, they were a little uncertain about where to go first. Where should I start? As you can see on some of our examples here, the different modules are numbered, but it is not like a, hey, start here, this is the beginning of the game type of indication. And that is just a function of the way that the website was intended to be used as a resource to find the information that you're looking for. But I think kind of skipping ahead a little bit to what does this mean? Helping our users with where should I start? Where should I give my attention to? And then as they build confidence with using such a novel website or a novel concept, allowing them then that freedom to choose their adventure from there. So what did we learn? The absence of a scam pattern, like I said, forging unique paths through this website, that they were really interested in the breed to wean and slaughtering processes were areas where we could expand, having more photographs, more information, since that's what our users were looking for in this particular group. Our results did indicate a positive view of the source. That trustworthiness score was really indicative that folks believed in the credibility of the Mashoffs and that they were trying to share information and be more transparent about their process, which we see as a really positive outcome. Why does this matter? So a couple things that Maggie and I want to touch on here from a research perspective is that a dynamic website that has multiple pages, such as the Mashoffs website, is not a great stimuli to use for eye tracking research. We had a very difficult time analyzing the statistics of such a website because of the way that the eyes are tracked and how all of the data is collected. Showing multiple web pages and tracking eye movement across multiple dynamic web pages with lots of content that moves around is too difficult to get a really strong read of exactly where people are looking. The absence of a scan path does show that they are looking through a lot of different sites all at once, but we may want to be more specific. Like when they're looking at the breed to wean farm, are they spending more time watching a video or looking at a photograph or reading text? That can inform us more about how we can be better practitioners if we know more so what types of information our participants are really looking for. So we would recommend getting more nitty-gritty into having a more specific stimuli than using a whole website. It is a novel approach on many counts, and so we learned a lot from this research, and sometimes that's just really the benefit of not having results or not having a significant difference, is learning what we can do better next time. For practice, we really think that applying the theory of selective attention is important as a reminder for us as practitioners to think about how much information we're inundating our audiences with, because they're inundated with a lot of information. And if we think about presenting information in a digestible manner, we know that transparency simply means to the user like providing adequate information for them to make a decision. And that's a really difficult bar to reach. And so thinking through how we can continue to involve our audiences and our users in informing us about what they're looking for, what information they find useful, and when do we reach that transparency threshold is another opportunity for future research. Maggie?
Yes. I'm going to piggyback off of what Nellie just mentioned. And these are some aspects that we didn't integrate into our paper, but when you have 2 years to let it percolate and think about it, I think now it's coming to like resonate a little bit differently, but still very important. So talking about being able to provide our consumers with as much information as they need to make decisions, but not overwhelming them. Because when you inundate with them with so much information, they don't retain it. They don't know where to go. They get a little bit lost. And so that invites us to invite the idea of integrating to a certain degree some message framing in our transparency methods. And I understand that this can be difficult to balance. It can be a delicate balance sometimes, because no matter at any level, at some level, any message framing will indicate some implicit bias, depending on what information you want to omit, what you want to emphasize or include. There will always be some level of bias in there, but it is very important. I think that what this website study shows is that how important it is to, as much as you can, harness some type of a central narrative, even in your website. We think of storytelling as writing articles and doing social media posts and other types of external publications. But I think that our consumers seek the same guidance. They need a same like central storyline, even with websites. And so as much as you can, being able to help your consumers go down a path where they can learn and approach these issues to different aspects, I think is very important. And so as we invite this open discussion also of transparency, something I think that as we seek to be able to show our transparency and how that interacts with trustworthiness, something that I've learned just in the industry that I'm in at this moment is the importance of investing in third-party certification schemes. There's a saying, so I'm going to give you all just a smidge of a context behind the U.S. hop industry. So hops in the United States can only be grown in very specific areas. So the Pacific Northwest accounts for 98% of production. And the craft brewing sector of the United States has revolutionized hop production. Craft brewing requires many more multitude more hops than traditional brewing methods. So our acreage has doubled in the last 10 years. And this has opened up a whole new avenue, because this new base of craft brewers is very selectively attuned to many different facets of production. They want to know about the rigorous standards of environmental stewardship that our producers are attaining. They want to make sure that they're reaching high worker protection standards and that they're investing in their communities. They want to know all these aspects of production that hop growers usually never had to share. And so it's invited a new platform to hop growers to be able to document what they're doing and to be able to try to show transparency of their production. So something that the hop industry has done is invest in these third-party certification schemes. The idea behind that is, okay, you don't have to trust us, but you can track us. It's the idea of accountability in this entire scope of transparency, of trustworthiness and transparency. Where does accountability fit in? So these third-party certification schemes, they are external organizations that tend to specialize on different systems. Many that the hop producers adhere to are food safety, making sure that everything in the production process will equal a food safe, high quality product. There are some systems that specialize in environmental stewardship practices. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a program called Salmon Safe that producers who can show on many different standards that they're not polluting waterways. They are Salmon Safe certified. So many of these certifications also, so a third-party auditor will come out, they have this huge long list, check off, make sure you're doing everything to their standards, and it costs about $5,000 a year per scheme, per certification scheme. So it is an investment for our producers, but it is important enough for them, and their consumer base needs that recognition, that third-party certification to be able to prove their transparency. So the idea, I think it's also worth inviting an idea that don't trust us, track us. Don't just believe what we're saying because we're saying it, because we're good people and you can just trust us. But here's this other person that, here's this third-party auditor who has proven that we're doing it like toe-to-toe on the line. So I think that's something that is worth exploring in this big system of agriculture as we move forward. So as we're going forward, looking at the scope versus the depth of information, I think that what the Mashoffs did is very transformative approach, and it's a really notable idea. I think that sometimes, of course, this comes into message framing, being able to help your participant decide where to go is also a really important factor. Something that I'm using this today. I joined the Washington Hop Commission, Hop Growers of America, this past year, and I invite you to go to our website. It's called USA Hops, usahops.com. And there you will find a website with probably the most convoluted coding that you could ever imagine. And there's tabs everywhere, and there's a lot of good information on that website, but it's very confusing. The categories aren't quite solidified. And so you could probably find that information in 3 different places, but it's in one. There's no, talk about a central narrative. There is no central narrative. And so when I approach that website today, I'm really thinking, I'm using what I learned from this study to approach how to restructure this website, how to make it the browsing capability, the easiest for our consumers to think about. And to do that, I think it is very important to be able to some degree, solicit what people want to know, what's most salient to them, because all industries are coming across this reckoning. And I think, of course, with any type of research, we think we know what people want to know, but it's really important to be able to hear it from the horse's mouth and to be able to use some qualitative data to back up to inform our decision making. And so being able to have a balance between the scope of what you're showing as well as a depth, but not too much depth, is really key going forward, as websites will become more integral than ever to being able to showcase transparency in our production systems.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for that science communication practitioner perspective. And as we have other folks in the room who are bringing dynamic perspectives to this conversation, we did have a list of questions to kind of guide a discussion for us. It's a small group. We would love to hear what everyone kind of came into this webinar wanting to know or hoping to learn. Would love to talk through these questions or answer any questions that you have for Maggie and I.
I might have missed it early on, but who funded your project, and did the Mashoffs know you were using their website?
The Mashoffs knew that we were using their website. They did not fund this research. This research was funded through a USDA grant for actually the eye tracking hardware and software. It was just a grant written for innovative methodologies and technologies to be used in agriculture. And so, yes, this was a USDA funded research project. The Mashoffs were aware of it, but they did not fund it.
So I assume you shared what you learned with them, and are they going to make changes based on that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure that this was a real bear of a website for them to make, and that I believe they are continuing to add to the information available, but in terms of probably recoding this website, it's not something at the top of their to-do list.
It is an amazing website. I was glad to get on today just to find their website. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a really cool resource in a lot of different contexts and makes us think differently about even what's possible on the web.
Becky, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is part of my job is working with a pork center at my university. And I had never seen this website before, even though we've used people from Mashoffs for, different presentations. And my eyes almost crossed at everything that I could do and see. And I'm pretty sure when I tried the process part and it ended up having numbers to it, that I missed some stuff. I missed some information because I didn't even realize, put your cursor over those and scroll down and see that. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a lot here. Now, to go along with that, my purpose for being on that website would be much different from your students being on that website. So I'm really interested in that, because I'm coming from looking for something specific, and probably a more informed background coming there. So it was interesting for me to look at the website while I was listening to what you found out.
Cool. Yeah, there's a whole case study here on web design and user experience and user interface design, and how, as Maggie was speaking about the USA Hops website, how do we design accessible websites that help our users know that you're in the right place, this is what you do next, here's what that means for you. Those are the like 3 central questions of website design. And when you first go to the Mashoffs website, those 3 things aren't clear. And so, yeah, it's very interesting. It's immediately impressive, but then kind of overwhelming, at least for me.
I agree on the overwhelming, especially when I think about it in terms of trying to make everything accessible. And, we're just doing that with, compared to this one, pretty plain websites, and it still takes some doing.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's almost like a video game, and it is designed for a younger generation. So
Yeah.
very, very non-linear.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question about the cost of the eye tracking software.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish I could remember. Maggie, do you remember how much it is?
I'd have to look at it again.
So we wrote, that's a great question. I'll see if I can find it really quick. We didn't write it, but our friend Caitlin Stanton wrote a professional development paper that's published in the Journal of Applied Communications that has more information about eye tracking technology. Let me see if I can actually get that over into the chat. Yeah, I'm going to drop that in the chat. And I'll see if I can find a $sign in here. Okay, Tobii Pro Lab software is priced at approximately $20,000, although academic discounts are available. You're welcome. Happy to share good friend Caitlin's research.
So that, is that cost just for software? Does that include the equipment too?
So a standard Tobii Pro screen-based eye tracker, which is the hardware, and access to Tobii Pro Lab, which is the software, is at $20,000. Now, when you go to the Tobii Pro website, there are lots of different options. There are glasses, goggle options. There's like something like a piece of hardware you would put on a phone. There's the screen-based eye tracker, which is what we had. And they continue to evolve this technology and more, but the $20,000 is for this type of system that we used in this study.
Okay.
And yeah, so that was grant funded. That's how we ended up being able to have the eye tracking lab at K-State, at Texas Tech in AgCom. And then also the Texas Tech AgCom program has a great relationship with Mass Communications, and they have a whole lab and more eye tracking hardware and software over there. And so we're fortunate to have that relationship that also allowed us to tap into some additional expertise to help us in guiding this study as well.
As you were doing your presentation, I was also searching around on that website. It reminded me of the SOAR Foundation's Fed by Science website, which it's not nearly as interactive as the Mashoffs, but it's a similar where you're looking at icons, and then when you click on them or you roll over them, you can see.
Get together.
Yeah. So if you like click on the eggs, you'll go to a information about dairy,
Oh.
So if you click on the blueberries, the yogurt, it'll take you to the dairy information. And if you click on the bacon, it'll take you to the pork. And they have one for each meal of the day. And it's just to promote science at federally funded science.
Cool.
Isn't that neat?
It is neat. I would love for them to indicate to me that I can do that
Yeah,
other than text. It needs to have something that changes color when I hover it or something.
right.
But that's really interesting. I love it. Cool.
But I agree that I think that the balance of how much information you put out on your website and how you serve it up is it's such a moving target, it seems, especially, you know, as you have, you know, people, younger generations get older and the technology advances and people become more technology savvy. You know, how do you balance the, you know, kind of the whistles and buttons, using the whole crayon box versus how do we tell that central message and keep, you know, repeating it over and over again, that storyline that you were talking about, and without overwhelming people with all the dynamic stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great central question. I was just speaking to a group yesterday, a lot of people in the meat industry, and having conversations with folks about where their food comes from, similar to what we're talking about. And we really kind of came down to this, there's this science communication paradox of like this facts that we want to communicate and then people's identities, and identity is always going to win out. And people really just want to feel like validated in their identity and that they're making a good choice. And so as complex as we like to make it, it's really just about how do we make someone feel good about the choices that they're making with their food. And it's a simple question with lots of different answers. But I think as we get wrapped up sometimes in like talking to specific groups and all of their needs, we're all human beings fundamentally with this personal identity that we just want to feel understood and belong. And so getting down to that, what is the simplest, most authentic story that we can tell to relate to other people? Because we all have to make those difficult food choices sometimes, or know someone who has, and maybe integrating that more into our stories can help us connect on a deeper level. And it all happens over time. It's not something that's, you know, a website is going to fix by any means, but it sure helps us move in the right direction.
Heather, I try to remember the, I should have brought up my ACE page. We had a earlier webinar where there was a discussion about advertising and whether if you told it from a personal standpoint, you had more interaction. Becky, you remember that, right? And then also then there was the complimentary one with just the data. And it was the storytelling that tended to get the best reaction and the best attention.
Yep.
And I think that for, at least in academia, we can get so number heavy. And I know that we're trying to do the storytelling. And I think that agricultural, you know, science writers, I think get that more than other writers. I know that it's still a challenge though, because those numbers look really nice, but you know, and then when you're dealing with academics that love their numbers.
Correct. Yeah, it's getting the academic to let you not use the numbers.
If I can just get my researchers to not talk about p-values during webinars, that would be great.
No one knows what that means.
Did anybody have any other questions or comments? Anything to share?
No other questions, but thank you for doing this, because it is so rare that I get something that has to do with my work that I can take
Thank you
back.
so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, I was at a conference this morning and I said, I have to go to this Zoom. I have to. I mean, you know, we just had somebody from Maschhoffs who has nothing to do with the website, you know, present at something the other day. And I'm thinking, this is rare, so I have to be here. And, you know, it doesn't necessarily specifically pertain to me, but it has some things for me to think about, and that I really appreciate. So thank you for doing it. Thank you for scheduling it. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry.
And I didn't turn on video because my connection is unstable.
But that's all right. We make do with the internet we have.
Well, I don't want to keep people here if there's no more questions, but again, thank you to Nellie and Maggie. Love this. I loved this paper. I loved reading about it, and I'm so glad that we're able to spend some time this fall highlighting all of the great Jack articles that are being published by our journal.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. We appreciate everyone spending some time this afternoon.
Okay, see you all later.